So today I wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind pretty heavily lately. And it's something that I've come to realization with my healing journey more heavily this last year. So the journey I've been on has been a solid 7 years. And this last year, I've come to understand and realize that your intuition is one of the most powerful tools that we have. And the reason that I came to that realization was as I'm going through this process of discovering myself and digging through my past and being more honest with myself about my experiences throughout my life and where I hold accountability for those experiences and understand that it's my job to deal with them and accept them. One thing that I've noticed this past year is when you get to this extremely comfortable, accepting place with yourself, your intuition or your gut feeling or your higher self, whatever you want to call it, it has a louder voice. And as I'm growing and understanding that, I'm starting to realize that I hear it more and more. And it becomes not just something that comes around when there's a big decision to be made, but it's also something that I'm constantly hearing all the time. And what I realized was that I was ignoring this a lot for most of my life. And I think we can all relate to that, feeling that we have of, oh man, hindsight's 2020 and I should have listened to myself. I knew something was going to happen, or I should have listened to myself. I knew that was going to happen. And we laugh about it, but oftentimes we brush it off as coincidence. And what I'm starting to understand and realize is that intuition is your higher self or your gut feeling that is really helping you and guiding you in the right direction to go and helping you in the decisions that make the most sense. And the cool thing is that it also tells you when there's something wrong. And you get that feeling when something doesn't feel right or it's a little bit off. And so I started thinking about that more and more. And as I've developed this, the cheat code method, which is a training and digital course that I give to students and people whoever's interested in taking the journey of learning how to go through self-discovery. I wanted to talk about it because I think it's so powerful in the sense that we oftentimes are ignoring one of the most wise and helpful mentors or confidants that we have, which is ourselves, but we've lost that connection to that intuition because we're so distracted and we're so there's so much noise in this world that takes us away from that capability to literally listen to and hear ourselves. And so what I want to do today is kind of walk through some of my methodology. What I did was I printed out a couple of illustrations that I use in my course to explain some of this. And what I wanted to do today was kind of walk you through some ideas that I've had around how we repair this relationship or clear up the line of communication that we have with our higher selves so that it's something that we have access to all the time versus not something that just comes up or pops up when when we're in a challenging situation. And so the first one I have here is, and those of you that are listening, I'll explain it, but you can also watch this on YouTube and see the illustrations. But the first one that I have here is a illustration of a child. And when we talk about our intuition, even as children, we have that intuition that comes to us. Even as children, we know when something's wrong or right, and we can tell. And when we're young, we're going through these emotions and we cycle through these emotions like happiness and sadness and all of these things. And what happens is if we experience something that we know is not right, we can oftentimes wall it off and that emotion gets buried. And because as children, we know something's wrong, but we don't know exactly how to explain it or how to process it. And so that emotion gets walled off. And what happens is, as we grow and we become adults, that walled off emotion is almost inaccessible to us. And when it's inaccessible to us, we're kind of separated from a version of ourselves, or the truest version of ourselves. We're separated from that because we don't have access to those emotions. And so what happens is, instead of relying on intuition, we rely on coping mechanisms. And because most of us were not taught how to cope in a healthy way, we adopt coping mechanisms, and we adopt these coping mechanisms from society and, people that we see, and maybe people that we have value in or hold value in. Those people, we adopt these coping mechanisms, or we just see what others are doing and we do the same thing. And so this illustration is an example of an adult or a man sitting in a box, and his emotions are on the outside of it. And this is an illustration that I used to kind of explain where I was, where alcohol was my coping mechanism because I didn't have access to my emotions. And because I had some traumatic things happen as a child, my internal, subconscious walled off those emotions because all I knew is that I didn't like them. And so I buried them. And what this also did is it put a block in me being able to communicate really clearly with my intuition and my higher self. And so I would default to these coping mechanisms like alcohol. And the thing is, it's not just alcohol or an addiction that can be a problem. It's also coping mechanisms can be it's anything that we do in excess to hide from our feelings. So I'll use an example as like even just, working out. It can be done in excess. It can be done in a destructive way. While working out is such a great thing, and being healthy is, physical activity is such a healthy thing. If we do it in excess, people can develop things like, eating disorders and things like that, because they get so obsessive about the result of what they're trying to get. And ultimately what that is, it is a coping mechanism, because we don't have the tools or the capability to access our emotions and feel them. And so I want to make it very clear that addiction is not the only destructive coping mechanism. There are many. Anything can be a destructive coping mechanism if it's done in excess. And so the idea is I wanted to kind of shed a light on people who are going through this process where what happens is, in this illustration, it's showing this cycle, this destructive cycle of where an individual feels an emotion and they're blocked by this internal subconscious wall that's been put up from traumatic events that have caused us to block it off. And then we go through this cycle of a destructive type of behavior. And again, it can be many different things: alcohol, overeating, outbursts of rage. And some people have issues with that. And so, but what happens is we just stay in this cycle and we keep rotating in this cycle because we can't get through this wall. And so we go to that coping mechanism, and that coping mechanism is destructive. And so then we just stay in this circle, and we keep rotating and rotating and rotating in this destructive circle. And it becomes further and further challenging to access your emotions, and you can't. And so you fall deeper into those negative coping mechanisms. Why this is so important is because we have to recognize what those are in our lives so that we can start to solve this problem. Because the ultimate end goal is that if you can revitalize those access to those emotions that you have and start to feel them, because emotions are meant to be felt, and they're there because our body's telling us something. Our mind is telling us something. When we feel an emotion, it is a flag or an indicator of something. And it's supposed to tell us, hey, there's an issue or a problem or a challenge that we need to understand and address. And that's why we're getting that emotion. You guys know, if you look at a child and, a child will cry because they drop their candy or, something like that. They cry from that. But then as you get become an adult, when that happens to you, you don't cry. You don't cry because you've ultimately overcome and you've understood that small thing. And now it doesn't affect you anymore. Well, as adults, maybe we're not crying, but we are throwing fits from a perspective. And I'll use myself as an example. When I would have a struggle at work or in a relationship, my fit would be, I'd be like, I need a drink and I need to go blow some steam off. And I would go on these benders and I would drink tons of alcohol over a weekend or something like that. That is the equivalent to throwing a fit. And if you look at it, if I look at it now from my perspective now, I understand that I was acting like a child, but it wasn't coming out in the same way. Right. And so that's where this illustration is interesting, because what it is it's an individual who you see as kind of just their normal selves. But then as we take on these challenges, right? It could be struggle within a relationship or at work or something like that. As we take on these challenges, if we don't know how to process the emotion, and we just push it down. We use, let's say I go drink and I use that coping mechanism and I'm ultimately just pushing it down and away. The problem is it doesn't go away. Time does not heal all wounds. It does not go away. It just gets suppressed and suppressed and suppressed. And what happens is eventually it comes out. And so in the illustration, it shows this balloon popping out of this individual because the emotions are just too great and it comes out. And that popping out, or that emotion coming out, that can be, again, like for me, it was going off and drinking way too much and acting foolish. That's my way of acting out or throwing a fit. And we have to recognize this because, again, if we're not able to process that emotion correctly, what's going to happen is it's going to come out in some way. It'll surface in some way that ultimately is going to and can potentially be, very destructive. And so what I teach in my program is the capability to, one, go in and find those challenges that happened in your younger years or whatever it is, those things that are really hangups or problems that they may even be hidden. They may be hidden. And I have a way that I show you how to find them and to understand them and to ultimately put them to bed. And what that does when you do that is it gives you the capability to start feeling the emotions. And one thing I think that's interesting is when I first started on this journey, I was like, man, I just want to be happy. I just want to be happy. And that's the ultimate goal. And I think that's a fair goal, but it's a trap because we are humans and we are going to feel emotions for the rest of our lives. I'm always going to be in a point where I feel some sadness or I feel some discouragement. Even if I'm the most enlightened being in the world, I'm still going to cycle through those emotions. And so what I understood as I went through my healing journey is it's not about being one emotion all the time, happy. It's about being able to feel all of those emotions and ultimately understand them and understand what they're trying to tell you. So in this illustration that I use, it has an individual in the center with a heart, and then it has all the emotions on the outside. And so the alternative is the man in the box who's blocked off from all of his emotions. This is where we want to get, and in having the capability to use and feel those emotions and understand them and not use a negative or destructive coping mechanism to avoid these emotions. We want to feel them. So the goal is to get to this place. Now, the reason that I'm talking about all this is because, again, back to what I was talking about earlier is once we clear these blocks, we have the capability to have a clear communication with our intuition. And it starts to become so strong. And it really becomes one of the most valuable assets that you have as a human is to have that clear communication with your intuition. Call it higher self, whatever you'd like. But the problem is for me and for a lot of individuals, it's challenging to say like, okay, that's good. That's great. I agree with you. But how do I do that? How do I go through that process to find that? And ultimately what I'm doing, and I like this illustration because this is an illustration that is basically this house sitting on this sinkhole or this pit. And you see all these layers in the pit of the house. And this is what I attribute to someone who's trying to make changes in their life, but they haven't gone and fixed the foundation. And so it's just like with a house, if we try to build on top of a faulty foundation, while we might build the most beautiful house, the problem is it's not stable and it will continue to break and fall down until we dig down and we fix the foundation. And so when we attribute that to ourselves, whatever we've gone through in our lives, we have to find a way to go back and understand those challenges and those areas where our subconscious might have walled off our emotions. And we have to understand them and process them as adults. So then what it does is it creates a scenario like this, where when we go down and do that, and this is an illustration of a hole that's been dug out and it has a solid, we've established a solid foundation to build on. In my program, I teach you how to go and find those false beliefs. And the reason I say false beliefs is a lot of what we believe about ourselves is false, because I believe we are a light, loving being, and we always have been that, and we always will be that for eternity. But when we come into this world, we take on the beliefs of those around us, and we take on even if, like, as an example, if a parent struggles to value themselves, even though they try to give their child love, that child will absorb that parent's incapability to love themselves. Even if the parent is giving the child all this love, if the parent themselves is struggling to love themselves, that child will absorb that. And so as children, we absorb the environments that we're in. And then what happens is we have these false beliefs about ourselves. Like, who hasn't thought I'm not good enough? Or, I'm never going to be this way, or I'm not worthy of love. One thing I challenge a lot of you to do is really think about and listen to the self-talk that you have with your inner monologue. It's shocking. If you sit and listen to it for a day or two, it's shocking, because we're the last people to receive love from ourselves. Most of us are. And that's where I found myself in a deep, dark hole, was while I was trying to display this, strong and powerful person on the outside, when I was struggling deep in addiction, I was horrible to myself. I was absolutely horrible to myself. The talk was absolutely disgusting. And I would never be friends with that person. If someone talked to me the way that I was talking to myself, I would never be friends with that person. And so we have to think about that and say, okay, well, why is that happening? Do we not think we're worthy? Do we not think that, is it humility, right? Like, I think the world teaches humility and to put others before yourself. I think it's a two-pronged issue. Put others before yourself. I don't think that you can give to others if you don't give to yourself. I think that you feel depleted if you're not filling your own cup. And then the problem is we search for validation and we try to get others outside of us to fill our cup. Or for me, I was using alcohol and, bad behavior and things like that to thinking that it would fill my cup. Money. Oh, that money will fill my cup. No, it won't. Eventually it will. It's this void that gets, it's infillable if we're not going inside ourselves and finding that validation for ourselves. And so if we don't go back and understand why we believe that we're not worthy, we can't build on that. And so it's like the house. We can't build on a faulty foundation. We have to go and dig down and understand our lives, remember what we went through. And I'm not saying that, you had to have had some major tragic or traumatic events like myself in order to have that issue. We all have it because we all have a false belief of who we are, because we are perfect, light, loving beings. That's what we are. If we don't believe that's what we are, and when I say don't believe, because that can also translate into how we treat ourselves. So as an example, if I'm drinking gallons of vodka in a weekend, that is not loving myself. That is torturing myself. And it's because at a low, deep level, I believed I wasn't worthy of love. I believed I was not, I wasn't good enough. And that's why I was hurting myself. I was really choosing to hurt myself because I didn't believe that I was worthy. So we want to, for me, it was a real big challenge to understand, how do I dig down and find why do I feel that way at a subconscious level? Because consciously you can lie to yourself and tell yourself that, no, I do love myself and I do, these things and that. But then the thing is, why are my behaviors, whether in a relationship or alcohol or eating bad and not working out, all these things, why are those actions not reflecting love towards myself? So the idea is we want to dig down and we want to discover what those issues are. And here I have an illustration of a house that is built on this rock solid foundation. And the reason for this is because more trauma is going to come in our lives. We are going to lose family members as we grow older. We're going to lose children. We're going to lose jobs. We're going to lose money. We're going to lose so many things, right? We're going to go through traumatic events. We will. And if we have this rock solid foundation of a person built, when something new comes, we can view it as an opportunity. We can view it as a way to grow or an experience that we can understand and learn more about ourselves. Instead of in my previous years, when I didn't have a rock solid foundation, when those types of things happened, it destroyed me. It destroyed me. My drinking got worse and I was going further and further downhill, and it perpetually was getting worse and worse to the point where I was going to take my life. Creating this foundation, going back and re-understanding who we are, what we went through, and realizing that we're responsible to do this work. It's not someone else. I think one big one that I struggled with for a long time was, I grew up in the FLDS. I was raised in the FLDS, and is a religious cult. And in my younger 20s, I just had so much anger and animosity towards my parents for raising me in that. Well, the problem is this: that's over. They can't do anything about it. That's what happened. They can't come to me and make it better in my mind. There's nothing they can do. They can apologize. They can do this, they can do that. The only person that can make that better is me. I have to take accountability for it and say, hey, that is something that happened. And now I can tell you wholeheartedly, I value everything that has happened in my life, because it has created the person that I am, and it's creating a person of character and of grit. And now I'm putting forth so much effort in order to help other people. I don't think if I wouldn't have had those challenges that I would be where I am. I really don't. And so I find value in it. But again, it's on me to go and do that work to fix those problems that I have in my own head about what happened to me. And it's more about understanding them and accepting them, and then finding the value in it. And so when something new comes, when a new traumatic event comes, I want to be able to understand it and find the value in it, because there is value in everything. There's value in it's an opportunity for growth. If we're always in this comfort zone where nothing makes us change, we're ripe and rotting, right? It's either you're green and growing or you're ripe and rotting. And so we have to understand that these new things will come, and we want to be prepared and set up in a way that will allow us to find value in them versus adding to our trauma. And one big thing about this is we have to say, okay, well, once we say we dig down and we find all these things and we accept them, let's say, well, moving forward, we have to understand that we create our lives every day. And when I was in the worst of my addiction and all of the things that were happening, I was creating that because it was the actions that I was taking every single day that were creating that cycle of pain. And so when I realized that I have to create the life that I want, and so I have to determine what am I going to do every day that's going to eventually create the life that I want. The challenge with that is this. So let's just take working out as an example. A lot of us go through this cycle of, we say, and like New Year's Eve is a perfect example of like, oh, I'm going to make a New Year's resolution and I'm going to start working out and I'm going to be healthy and do all these things. And then by February, we're sitting on the couch eating Doritos, right? Like we didn't stick to it. Well, the biggest reason that we didn't stick to it is because we didn't establish and create a why behind it. Now, the why might be, well, I want to be skinny. Okay, why? Well, because then people will like me more, right? Like, or I'll like myself more if that's the case. Well, if we don't, the problem with a lot of these is if we don't see a relatively short-term result, we give up and we go back to that default of relaxation and comfort because growth is hard. And so in my program, once we dig down, I really put a lot of emphasis on establishing and creating a why. And I go through a deep process of establishing the core values and items that are ultimately important to you as an individual. But this is where I think I differ in the sense that a lot of us have been given our core values by our parents or religion or something like that. But how many of us have actually sat down and created and committed to values that we have determined are ours? What I mean by that is, for me, one thing that I did in this process is when I was looking in the mirror, I understood that I was lying to myself a lot. And it was over small things. Like the example, I love to use this example of just, setting an alarm in the morning. Like I would set my alarm for 7:00, but then 7 would come around and I'd hit snooze and I would be in this habit of ultimately not getting out of bed till 8 every day. And when I started to go through this process, I had this realization to myself and I said, why am I lying to myself about this? Like, why am I setting the alarm for 7 when I know I'm not going to wake up? I know it. And so in this process of trying to determine my core values and trying to determine my why, one of the things that I landed on that I have been so dedicated to is that in my internal monologue, I don't lie to myself. So honesty is important to me, but it's honesty with myself. If I truly believe I'm not going to wake up at 7, I'm not setting my alarm for 7. I'm going to set it for when I am going to wake up. I'm going to commit to myself. And I know that seems like a small thing, but when we start to extrapolate that and we look at it on everything that we do, creating those core values. So the example goes back to the gym. When I first started working out, I said to myself, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. That's what I promised myself. But the thing is, I reduced it down to saying, I'm going to go to the gym. So the promise to myself was, I'm going to get to the gym, whatever the workout is and how long I work out and all those things. It doesn't matter because I'm going to stick to that thing that I'm telling myself because I knew that I could do that. I knew that I could do that. And when I got to that place, when I started going and I started committing to myself, the cool thing is I created this like momentum. Because what I realized is once I start keeping promises to myself, this level of trust starts to build with yourself. And it's an incredible thing. And you start to realize how much you didn't actually trust yourself before. So once I started doing this, I started building on it. And I said, okay, now I'm going to incorporate a workout plan. Now I'm going to go 5 times a week. Now I'm going to incorporate that I'm going to go at 5 a.m. in the morning. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do that. And I started doing that, and it started building and building and building. And I started holding myself accountable and sticking to the promises that I made to myself. This is an incredible tool. Sticking to the promises that you make to yourself. When you start to stay consistent with it, it builds a level of confidence in yourself that is incredible. It is incredible. And I challenge all of you to try this. And again, I think a lot of us fall into the trap of creating these unrealistic or unattainable goals. And the problem is we don't see that instant result, and we don't get that instant dopamine hit of success, so we fall off. So what I challenge my students to do, and a lot of people that I work with, is saying look, I talk a lot about meditation, and I think it's such an important thing, and I think it should be a cornerstone of everyone's life. And a lot of people struggle to start implementing it. And with one of my students, I told him, I says, just do it for 1 minute a day. Can you commit to that, to do it for 1 minute a day? And he said, yeah, I'll do that. Now he's meditating for 20, 30 minutes a day because he started to have that success of that routine, and he started to build trust with himself. How horrible is it when we tell ourselves we're going to do something and then we don't? We fail. We lose trust in ourselves. And that is the worst thing that can possibly happen. And that relates directly back to intuition. If we don't trust ourselves, how can we trust our intuition? How can we trust that gut feeling? We can't, because we also don't believe when we make those small commitments to ourselves, we don't believe ourselves. And so we can't have that relationship with our higher selves if we don't have the relationship with our conscious selves in the day-to-day lives of sticking to what we say to ourselves. When we get deeper into the program, I talk about creating, looking at our lives and talking about unintentional routines that we have. And so the examples of those are like hitting the snooze button, skipping breakfast, staying up late and watching social media, not having a time to go to bed, versus when we flip that and say, okay, because that unintentional routine is creating our lives. It's creating our lives. And so if we flip that and say, okay, I want to be intentional, I'm going to wake up at a specific time of day. And again, I'm not encouraging you to say, hey, you have to wake up at 5 a.m. or whatever, 4 a.m. to be successful. That is not true. What creates success is consistency. So I suggest pick a time, and I don't care when it is, but pick a time to wake up and stay consistent with it. And I promise you, over a period of time, you will start to have a circadian rhythm that happens, and you will have the best sleep. You'll feel rested, and you will feel so successful by sticking to something that you have set for yourself. And it's such a small thing, but that turns that unintentional routine into an intentional routine. And that intentional routine starts to create the life that you want for yourself. Ultimately, we all want to be happy. We all want to be successful and flourish. And the problem is we're not going to flourish if we don't intentionally create it. It's super important. So I talk about creating an ideal schedule. And then I think the bigger one to that is, when we, like I said with the gym, when we create these ideas of like how we want our days to go and how we want our lives to be, I think the problem is we bite off more than we can handle. And then the problem is we feel that success. And so we don't stick with it. And so I think the important thing here is what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to go through and create this daily, I'm going to create like my perfect day. And it's a daily routine that in my mind, if I was to do this every day, it would create, over time, it would create this immaculate life. But the problem is, when we get stuck in perfectionism and things like that, we start to understand that it's like, oh, if I can't do it 100%, it's not going to work, and I'm going to fail, and this and that, and it just like builds on itself, this snowball of negativity. So I implemented what I call this 80% rule, which is basically, I have my perfect day lined out, but I say I want to hit 80% of it, because there's going to be challenges, there's going to be things that come up. I'm not always going to be able to hit there, but if I'm hitting 80% of my routine on a regular basis, that is like, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to invest $1 every day, but I actually only hit 80 cents every day, that's way better than investing $0 every day. And the thing is, just like with my student when I challenged him to do 1 minute of meditation per day, he naturally progressed to 20 and 30 minutes a day. And so the thing is, if we're not driving for perfectionism, we're driving for consistency. So if we can create these routines where we have this consistency, and again, just a little thing, just as small as starting your day at a particular time every day, promising to yourself you're going to wake up at the same time every day, just a little thing like that over time can build this massive amount of momentum. And we have this dopamine release of success. And it's just a small thing, but we have this success within ourselves and saying like, hey, I told myself I was going to wake up at a certain time, and I've been doing it every day for a month. That's an incredible, powerful thing that you have within yourself that can help you drive to the next level of success for yourself, and really ultimately creating that value and that life that you want. So when we do this over time, what happens is we start to, and what I've noticed really powerfully this last year, is that my communication with my higher self, or that intuition, is so strong now that because I've held myself accountable and I've stuck to these intentional routines that I've created for 7 years, I trust myself. And so then when I get that small feeling in my chest, or that gut feeling, I trust it. And I'm telling you, this is one of the most powerful things that we could possibly have in our lives. So I want to help individuals find this. I want to, whatever it may be, whether it's you listen to the podcast, you read my book, I'm happy to work with you directly. Whatever it is, right? Watch the YouTube videos, whatever it is, anything that you can find that's going to help you. But I promise you that if you start on this path and you start to find this accountability within yourself, to trust yourself and be honest with yourself, and ultimately be able to create that strong line of communication to your intuition, it's going to serve you in so many ways, invaluable ways that I can't even imagine that you would really be able to put into words. Because I can tell you this, where I am today, I'll give you an example. 7 years, it's been exactly 7 years. September 14th was 7 years that I have been sober. When I got sober, that first few days, it was really a survival mentality. I really didn't, I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to be sober for a year. I really couldn't. I couldn't fathom it. But I knew that's what I wanted. I knew without a doubt I did not want to continue to drink. I knew it. Because it was just suffering. It was just suffering all the time. It was just pain. There was nothing good about it at all. When I would drink, it was just to reduce the amount of shaking that I had, and it was just horrible. But I never imagined where I could be mentally. And where I am today, I'm telling you, I could not have asked for it, because it's so far beyond what I believed was even possible. And how it all came about is by understanding my past and creating a routine and a why for what I want. And I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I knew I wanted it. And I knew that if I could be honest with myself and about who I was, and create a routine and create a life that I wanted, because I knew I didn't want what I had, that intuition is what eventually came in and started guiding me to my next step and to my next step and growing and growing. And like I said, I couldn't have imagined where I am today 7 years ago. And it was only through intuition that I've been able to make the next step and make the next step and take the next step. And I'm following it again and doing things like my course and the podcast and things like that, in really not knowing how I'm going to get to that next level of where I want to be, which is ultimately I want to be at a place where I can help as many people as possible. That is where I want to be. And so that path seems unclear to me as how I get there. But one thing I do know is that if I listen to my intuition and I follow my gut and I stay on that high passion side, I will find a way to get there. And I think every single one of you has the capability to do that. And I promise you that you have the capability to get further than you can possibly imagine than where you're right now. You could be sitting in a certain place right now, and I'm telling you, if you can implement this stuff and put it into practice, you will go further than you can possibly imagine. And that's what I want to help folks do. I want to help as many people as possible take that first step. And I have a step-by-step guide of how to do it, step by step. I was in the lowest point that most humans can be in from a mental state. I was at the end. I was at a point where I had no hope, but my intuition came in and said, "Hey, try this. Try stop drinking. Try to find a way." Even to the point where it told me, I was working in software, and it told me, it was like, you got to quit your job. And the common sense side of me is like, well, if I quit my job, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to do this? But the stronger side, the intuition, that higher self inside said, Thomas, you have to quit your job and put all of your effort into getting sober. So I did. I didn't ever have a struggle paying my bills. I found a way, and I created ways to do it. And I kept following that higher passion within myself and listening to my intuition. And it led me to the next step and the next step and the next step. And that was 7 years ago. And to this point now, I'm 7 years sober. And but sober is like an understatement of what I've done for myself. Because that was just getting rid of a coping mechanism. Now I understand how to cope. And when new challenges arise, I know how to cope, and I know how to feel those emotions and understand where the growth and the experience that I'm getting is valuable. And it's to the point now where I want to help as many people as I possibly can. So I encourage you to go to my website, thechicodes.com. Watch my YouTube videos. If you feel like just, you don't want to talk to me or work with me, you can get my book and listen to hear my story there. I also teach meditation, and I do some hypnosis training that helps you go inside yourself and find some of those challenging experiences that you had as a child that can be the bedrock of helping you heal and dig down that foundation to create a solid foundation. So I appreciate everyone listening, and I encourage you highly to reach out to me. My email is thomas@thechicodes.com. I'm happy to take your emails and answer any questions anyone has. I am here to help, and hope for you the best.